Good morning from the Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, and this is your Access and Privacy Online news summary for Saturday, August 23rd. We start with the flip-flop from Alberta, where public backlash has forced Premier Danielle Smith to walk back plans to stop disclosing government expense receipts. Our access and privacy scan across the country brings us stories ranging from the everyday challenges Canadians face trying to get information about local services, to questions of national security as Canadian diplomats abroad come under attack. We'll look at the continuing impact of the Taliban in Afghanistan, with news stories reaching into Canada and Britain. And we'll wrap with developments south of the border, where privacy and access rights continue to collide with politics and commerce. Let's dive in. We begin in Alberta, where Premier Danielle Smith is once again under pressure over expense disclosure. Her government recently moved to stop publishing ministers' and officials' expense receipts online, a major shift that raised alarms for transparency. After widespread public backlash, the government has reversed course, with Smith now saying receipts will return, but with redactions for security purposes. These redactions would not include exact locations of accommodations like hotels to ensure the security of elected members and staff. The move follows legislative changes earlier this year that weakened access to information in Alberta, including limits on recording and documenting proceedings. Critics say this is part of a pattern, restricting public access, then adjusting only when pushback becomes overwhelming. FIPA continues to monitor these developments as Alberta remains a flashpoint for both access to information and government accountability. Across the country, Canadians continue to experience the challenges and consequences of access and privacy shortfalls. In Ontario's Huron-Perth region, Kelsey Bent, LGI reporter at the Listowel Banner, shows us that newcomers to Canada struggle with integration. And that is compounded as locals themselves have difficulty accessing basic information about services. A study by the Immigration Partnership within Huron County's Economic Development Department analyzed 10 challenges immigrants face when looking for housing. These include gaps in government support, tenant rights, and houses for rent advertising. In New Brunswick, Eve Cable, LGI reporter at the Eastern Door, reports that new details are emerging from a class action lawsuit against cannabis producers, raising transparency concerns over how companies disclose ownership information. Court documents state that the applicants allege that a refusal letter for a standard processing license from the Kahnawake Cannabis Control Board, the KCCB, is inaccurate and includes unfounded allegations. The applicants say the letter is an unsubstantiated character attack on the cannabis shop representatives and others. The refusal letter from the KCCB stated there were multiple issues with their application. The issues listed include site ownership discrepancies, incomplete personal information, as well as concerns regarding the involvement of one Ryan Chucky McComber due to undisclosed ownership or investment and character and suitability concerns. Next, in the Niagara region, Ed Smith, LGI reporter at The Pointer, reveals that under the current council, the number of residents at risk of losing their home or business has skyrocketed, highlighting the role access to municipal information plays in community stability. Reports reveal that the 4-year term of the previous council, the number of properties in tax arrears ranged from 2,846 to 3,361 each year, averaging 3,143 annually. Since the current council took office in November 2022, those numbers have surged, marking a total increase of 1,371 properties in arrears, or a 43.6% jump. The data replicates findings from a similar FOI request submitted to the city of St. Catharines earlier this year. As reported by The Pointer, council in the neighboring city also approved historic tax increases during its first 2 years in office. Those increases were followed by a comparable surge in the number of properties falling into tax distress. Court proceedings and records in Manitoba reveal that a man who attempted to stab a pastor had previously told hospital staff he intended to kill a priest. The man had previously been hospitalized and has been diagnosed with mental health issues, The court was told at some point before the attack he went to a hospital for help, saying he was going to kill a priest. An official with the Canadian Mental Health Association said the case raises questions about what services were made available, raising serious questions about information sharing between institutions when credible threats are identified. Back in Alberta, Anna Smith, LJ reporter from the Medicine Hat News, brings us details that a two-time municipal candidate is calling for better decision-making processes at council, citing transparency shortfalls as a barrier to trust. Medicine Hat City Council candidate Kelly Allard is calling for easier access to information for citizens, as well as clearer guidelines for media engagement. She also cited a project known as The Village in Duncan, British Columbia, which serves as transitional or temporary housing for those experiencing homelessness, as an example of something she would like to see within Medicine Hat. Here in British Columbia, a series of reports from the ombudsperson Jay Chalk warns that the province's whistleblower protection law still falls short in key areas, leaving public servants vulnerable when they speak out. The reports also find that many public sector employees are not aware of the legal protection afforded to them by law, and staff responsible for receiving complaints and disclosures are often not adequately trained on their responsibilities. Chalk also says that his office is recommending 39 amendments to the legislation to improve its effectiveness, such as extending protection to 500 additional public bodies, including local governments and professional regulatory groups. And now shifting to Canadians abroad, a lawyer says he is very confident that a foreign adversary deliberately attacked Canadian diplomats in Cuba, underscoring ongoing risks to Canadians abroad and the importance of transparency and how such incidents are investigated. A lawyer for Canadian diplomats and their families says he believes the mysterious ailments they suffered in Cuba were caused by a foreign adversary, despite a federal government report from Global Affairs Canada that dismisses the theory. However, the lawyer showed doubts and says he believes the illness, sometimes known as Havana syndrome, was caused by foreign adversaries. Turning to the Taliban in Afghanistan and their far-reaching and continuing impacts. Efforts are underway to bring Afghan women at risk of deportation to the University of Regina, highlighting how Canadian institutions are stepping in where immigration protections fall short. An advocacy group and the University of Regina are raising money to help relocate the women to Saskatchewan to continue their education, because the United States government has suspended their scholarship funding in Qatar. Jeff Keshen, the president and vice chancellor of the university, said it has the space to provide the women with free housing and meals if the tuition is raised. Meanwhile, a retired Canadian general is urging Ottawa to help the family of a former Afghan translator escape Taliban rule, saying Canada has a moral obligation to those who assisted its mission. The translator's sister says she fears that she and her 22-year-old son will soon face deportation from Turkey and reprisals in Afghanistan because her brother assisted Canadian troops. The woman says she believes the Taliban killed her husband in 2013 because of her brother's work with Canadian troops. The reporter has written letters to Immigration Minister Lena Diab and Prime Minister Mark Carney to no avail. Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada said it cannot comment on specific cases due to privacy legislation. And in a disturbing development, there are continued impacts in the United Kingdom from cybersecurity attacks that intersect Afghan refugees, troops, and journalists. The Jet Center, which provides ground handling for flights, said late Friday that it suffered a data security incident, which led to unauthorized access to a limited number of company emails. Currently, about 3,700 individuals are thought to be potentially affected by the incident. This includes Afghans who were brought to the UK, troops traveling to routine military exercises, and journalists accompanying government ministers on official matters. And now turning to international news, and starting south of the border, the collision of politics and privacy continues. In a case highlighting the risks of data sharing between agencies, a judge has ordered Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s health department in Massachusetts to stop giving Medicaid data to deportation officials, ruling that the practice violated privacy and due process protections. In July, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services entered into a new agreement that gave the Department of Homeland Security daily access to view the personal data, including Social Security numbers and home addresses. This prompted the lawsuit over privacy concerns and an overreaching immigration crackdown. In Louisiana, the state has sued Roblox, alleging the massively popular gaming platform fails to adequately protect children from exploitation and harmful content. The lawsuit alleges that Roblox has failed to implement effective safety measures to protect child users from adult predators. This isn't the first lawsuit Roblox has faced for similar reasons. Last month, a lawsuit was filed in Iowa after a 13-year-old girl was allegedly introduced to an adult predator on the platform. These cases underscore growing pressure on tech companies to be accountable for how they handle young users' data. Across the Atlantic, Britain has scrapped a controversial demand that Apple provide backdoor access to encrypted data, after talks with U.S. Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. The demand started when the British government reportedly served Apple with what is known as a technical capability notice, ordering it to provide the access under a sweeping law called the Investigatory Powers Act of 2016, which has been dubbed the Snoopers Charter. Gabbard previously said a demand for backdoor access would violate the rights of Americans and raise concerns about foreign government pressuring a U.S.-based technology company. This story reflects the prior nature of collegial intelligence sharing amongst the Five Eyes powers of the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. There are also growing reports of these arrangements starting to break down as the U.S. is increasingly withholding intelligence to drive its own international narrative. It calls into question the strength of these arrangements and the status of allies on the international stage. As always, we hope you found today's stories help you stay informed about the latest issues surrounding privacy, information management, and public transparency. To help us keep the mics on, be sure to subscribe to FIBA News Monitoring or consider a donation. Our writer is Sean Fisk. Original music in today's show was composed by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, your host and producer. Thank you for joining. A big FIBA thank you to all the contributors, reporters, and outlets that make this podcast possible, and to you, our listeners, who help make this successful. We're going to be taking a 2-week hiatus as we close out the summer to refresh and refit for the year ahead. Be sure to tune back in when we return mid-September with more great access and privacy news. Stay safe and stay informed.